and welcome to this online presentation, Proust Tomorrow, New Knowledge from New Readings. I'd like to start with something about Shakespeare. Jonathan Miller says, it's precisely because Shakespeare performances are interpretations rather than copies that they have survived. Shakespeare's imagination admits so many possible interpretations that his work has enjoyed an extraordinary afterlife. Now, interpreting Proust, we are not debating stage settings and costumes, but the question of what knowledge it's right to bring to our readings. This has been controversial, whether it's better to aspire to be alongside Proust, inside his head as it were, or whether to stick with whatever mental furniture or mentality we might bring today. Let's take a sample of text open to interpretation. Même mentalement, nous dépendons des lois naturelles beaucoup plus que nous ne croyons, et notre esprit possède d'avance les particularités que nous croyons choisir. So we are less free to choose ourselves than we commonly imagine. The reader of Proust's day would have already seen the implications for the existence of free will and Cartesian dualism. But a modern take is bound to be different. Already, the discovery of DNA in 1953 gives us the notion that genetic makeup can affect our entire being. Then there's the work by Libet in the 1990s on brain function, showing that decisions take place before we are consciously aware of making them. Thomas Nagel summed up the position taken by modern neuroscience. Our brains may have free will, but we don't. Today's and tomorrow's readers cannot unlearn what they know. And the interaction between the recherche and later knowledge is not just one way. It can actually be a two-way process involving an influence exerted by the recherche on the creation of knowledge. Writers who are trying to advance our understanding of consciousness often use references to the arts, and in particular, it seems, Proust. Nicholas Humphrey cites Bergot's Petit Pan de Mer Jaune to illustrate his explanation of the borrowed phenomenality of objects, whereby we experience a sensation which we then ascribe to an exterior object. It is key to his explanation of consciousness itself as a sort of motivating illusion. So my view of what it is to study Proust is the complete opposite of wanting to get into his head at the time of writing. In view of the two-way links between Proust's writing and later thinking, it's pretty clear that the afterlife of the recherche is a dynamic object of study, and that readings will go on developing, along with the development of subsequent mentalities in successive generations of readers. You may think the examples I've given suppose some rather specialized science knowledge, but I think it's right to think that future readers will gradually absorb advances in scientific thought and will see the world through scientific spectacles, as James Flynn says, the IQ studies guru. Steven Pinker wishes the humanities would let science in now. He says, a consilience with science offers the humanities countless possibilities for innovation in understanding. As a general rule, Proustians have not dwelled on the innovation in understanding to be had from comparing ideas found in Proust and developments in science since the time he was writing. We do comparative literature, but not comparisons between literature and subsequent scientific thought, that I do, and I think we should. But how can we say that a work continues to grow throughout its afterlife, conveying ideas and proposing knowledge? There is sometimes a hesitancy on the part of critics to put their finger on what it is, if not the author-narrator statements that speak in a novel. My argument in 1979, just the other day, was that as much attention needs to be paid to oblique as to direct modes of communication in recherche, and that the book uses literary algorithms, processes, inviting the reader to apply an explanation from one place to another. Joshua Landy develops a comparable idea further in Philosophy as Fiction with his proposal of a training effect. And the judgment of Vincent Descombe is that the philosophy of Proust's novel is not to be sought in this or that thought content, but rather in the fact that the novel requires of the reader a reformation of the understanding. I agree with that. But how does it happen? Some say style does it, but I think we need to look for other pointers in the book itself to know how the book is to be taken. The opening of the novel challenges our assumptions. After a short doze, the hero's subjectivity returns, but for the first few seconds settles elsewhere, embodied as a church, a quartet, or a royal rivalry. Thus the reader is confronted with the question of what it is to be confined to a single conscious self. The fully developed endpoint of this questioning is the panpsychic position taken by some consciousness theoreticians like David Chalmers. Consciousness is everywhere. The hard problem is why we have subjectivity. Elsewhere in Proust's novel, the panpsychic question is posed in a striking and direct way by the narrator. Une seule intelligence dont nous sommes tous colocataires. So the pointers are there in both direct and oblique form. The emphasis from the outset on questions of mind, reality, and their interaction in consciousness suggests strongly that these questions, still unresolved today, will be the ones illuminated by what happens in the text. Let's now look at some modern-day theoreticians of consciousness. Douglas Hofstadter talks of selfhood as arising from self-referential feedback, a strange loop of human perception. Nicholas Humphrey, a reader of Proust, as we saw, goes further in this direction and argues, consciousness is a magical mystery show that you lay on for yourself. You respond to sensory input by creating a seemingly otherworldly object, an ipsundrum, which you present to yourself in your inner theatre. Humphrey compares an ipsundrum to a Penrose triangle, the basis for the well-known Escher staircase that never seems to end. And does that remind you of the structure of a well-known novel? It does me. A linear structure with an intriguing form. We cannot be sure whether the book that the narrator determines to write is the same book that we've been reading, but we are certainly faced with a spiral structure containing an end which is in some way superposed on its own beginning. The strange loop structure holds for the novel as a whole, but also, just like a fractal, for parts of it. A particularly clear Penrose triangle is to be found at the opening of Nom de Pays le Nom. It breaks down as follows. 1. Baalbec I imagined on stormy days. 2. Dreams of Baalbec. 3. Later, the name is sufficient. 4. Plans are actually made. 5. Illness prevents the trip, causes walks in the Champs-Élysées to begin. Not to begin again, to begin. It's a loop, a strange loop if you like. So, readers of Proust's novel today can see the exploration of consciousness taking many different forms in the novel, and entering into a relationship with modern theorizing. What about theorizing on time? What's the relationship there? Let's take two recent publications, one in the year 2000 by philosopher-physicist Julian Barber, and one in 2014 by his former collaborator, physicist Lee Smolin. Barber demonstrates that ultimate reality is a completely timeless configuration space, or phase space, which he calls Platonia. Each point in this arena corresponds to a possible relative disposition of all the particles in our universe and the multiverse. Our sensation of time rests on our projections of past and future from nows corresponding to points in Platonia. He uses the term time capsules for objects with temporal implications that sustain our illusion of time, and says life histories are simply paths linking points in Platonia on a basis of best fit matching of one point with another. It's an alarmingly unconventional vision of reality, but one that strikes a clear chord with the segmented, discontinuous vision of Proust's narrator. Pour être exact, je devrais donner un nom différent à chacun des moi qui dans la suite pensa à Albertine. Je devrais plus encore donner un nom différent à chacune de ces Albertines qui apparaissaient devant moi, jamais la même. The Platonian vision of a timeless, static reality containing myriads of nows ties in with many observations in the Recherche. The self arriving at an arbitrary choice of bedroom upon waking, or notre moi est fait de la superposition de nos états successifs. Lee Smolin, the second of my two Time Lords, explains that Barber's analysis is the underlying error of modern thought. For Smolin, time has been wrongly characterized from Einstein on as a merely emergent characteristic of the composite reality of space-time. Now, emergence means essentially the level at which a phenomenon is viewed. Boiling water has its own characteristics, which are emergent in relation to the behavior of individual water molecules. Smolin says progress in physics has stalled, and the way through the impasse is to take global time as fundamental, not emergent. What he proposes, in effect, is le temps retrouvé, though he does have the decency to call his book Time Reborn. Corollary of that stance is that if time is fundamental, then it is space that has to be merely emergent. Again, alarmingly unconventional, but Smolin asks us to see space in terms of a network of connections held together by energy. So in the early universe, everything was connected to everything else. As the universe cooled, the dimensions resolved to 3, and that's the scenario for the emergence of space. Proust rattles our cage in an exactly similar way. Do you remember the curé in Combray who recommends being in Jouy le Vicomte whilst simultaneously enjoying the view from the Saint-Hilaire belfry? C'est tout un réseau où la localité est prise. The idea of emergence is powerful. A central issue for many studying consciousness is whether it emerges from brain function. A key debate is whether a computer, or at least a virtual van Neumann machine, could have consciousness, as Daniel Dennett and others maintain. The notorious hard problem of consciousness remains, and it centers on emergence. Emergence itself is explicitly in play in the Recherche. Take Vinteuil's little phrase, les motifs en émergent. We all know this phenomenon. It's there whenever music switches from a repetitive or busy background to a serener melody, playing as it were over the heads of the multitude of notes beneath. There is a change of gear in perception, often accompanied by a feeling of pleasure, comparable to a phase change, where instead of 4 beats to a bar we hear 2, or indeed to an elision, where instead of several words the mot juste asserts a higher order of things. Proust writes émerge without knowledge of the importance that this concept would subsequently assume, but his use effortlessly bears the weight the term has in a scientific context. So these are interesting relationships, comparisons of ideas, if you like. But future readers will need a more extensive basis for saying what what the book is telling us. I would now like to bring in my preferred basis, the whole question of the temporal structure of the novel. And when you look at temporal structures, the first thing that strikes you is that the internal common language chronology of the events in the Recherche speaks to an orthodox time plan. It's only really when external indicators are introduced, the ones referring to better or lesser known historical time markers, that the questions begin. And we can see this in this chart, which is based on one in my 1979 book. This is the top half of the chart, and that's the lower half. A more legible version of this is available on the website. At the top here, I've circled one event, Madame de Villeparisis' matinee. We'll look at that single event in more detail in a moment. The time plan overall is conventional. It's not particularly suggestive of any rethink of reality. But we have to remember this is at one remove from the reader. It's like the author's workshop manual. You can only see this by reverse engineering the novel. The reader's experience is different. There's no time to develop this here, but I think that the reader experiences something much more like a succession of nows a la Julian Barber. So, now for Madame de Villeparisis' matinee. Here's the relevant extract from all the dating information I've collected, both internal but more importantly, external. The time scale in years runs down the left-hand side. The green bar shows the year 1899, indicated by the internal chronology, but the blue bar shows the date 1898, which fits a chronology based on historical events accessible to the general reader. On this occasion, it agrees with the Dreyfus-related events shown by outlining, but that's not always so. Three conflicting historical indicators suggest later than 1903, 5, or 7. And finally, up along the top edge, you can see listed the 21 indicators of a specialized nature, each one corresponding to a column in the chart, each giving a bracket of a possible situation in time. Sometimes a later than constraint only. You can see the violations of orthodox time. A single day like this should have a single green-blue year, and the pink later thans should be pushed up above that year, and the gap between the grey parts of the columns should be opened up so that the blue-green bar fits effortlessly between them. A sober-looking chart actually conceals a complex and rather strange circumstance of mutually conflicting time indications for a single day, and you can find something similar to this in most of the other events from the time dependencies chart. How will readers react to the contradictory temporal information of such episodes? How will they interpret it? Maybe by picking up on the narrator's regular reference to other worlds, parallel universes, if you like, what Proust calls le monde des possibles. There are developments of this idea of many alternative universes in modern thought, both in cosmology, the multiverse, and quantum physics, Everett's many worlds interpretation. These ideas fit in with Barber's but not Smolin's vision. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics has progressed from being a respectable minority view 25 years ago to being a mainstream position acknowledged by many physicists and borne out, for example, by the existence of quantum computing, in which David Deutsch has played a large part. Even future readers may continue to find it taxing to conceive of how exactly reality can fork at every instant. But experiencing a single day which belongs simultaneously to different points in time is surely a good preparation for trying, and an advance intimation of a truth that science is still unraveling today. David Deutsch makes an implicit nod in Barber's direction when he says that different times are special cases of different universes. It looks as if a close examination of chronology may show that there is a Barborian backbone to the recherche. And that's perhaps also true under the other interpretation of quantum reality, the standard Copenhagen interpretation, where the intervention of an observer causes the collapse of the wave function that reduces the cloud of possible electron positions to a single one. In the same way, the ostensible single event in Proust has various potential positions in time, actuated differently according to the successive moments of reader attention. So I'm nearly finished. What to conclude? Well, the fact that the chronological data support Barber's vision of a timeless world points to one conclusion very clearly. Proust readers tomorrow will, if sensitized to these implications, be far less inclined to be disappointed by the somewhat underwhelming revelations of Le Temps Retrouvé, namely that people age and have vivid memories of the past. It's only if we first have insight into timelessness that we can truly welcome the assurance that time exists after all. I think this conclusion shows the value of continuing to examine the chronology of the novel to see what it reveals. The temporal structures of the recherche are such that future readers will imaginatively experience reading Proust the questions at the heart of the scientific debate of their day. Considering Smolin's diagnosis that both physics and cosmology are stalled and need a new injection of imagination, it seems likely that the recherche will, in the future, remain required reading for humanities and science alike. The amplitude of Proust's imagination will go on illuminating the way for those in search of new knowledge.